The evening sun was slowly setting behind the small town of Brooksville. The streets were quiet, and the soft orange glow made everything look peaceful. But not everything in Brooksville was as calm as it seemed. For years, the police department had been criticized by the local community for unfair treatment, especially toward minorities. People had learned to keep their distance whenever they saw flashing lights in the rearview mirror. Danielle Harris was driving home from her office that Friday evening. At 32, she was a successful professional, known for her intelligence, calm nature, and determination. She had recently moved back to Brooksville after getting promoted to a higher position in a government agency, but she still hadn't told anyone exactly what her new role was. Danielle believed in keeping things private until the right moment came. Her car, a shiny black SUV, glided smoothly along the nearly empty road. She turned up the radio, humming softly to her favorite song, trying to shake off the stress of a long day. That's when she noticed the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Danielle frowned. She was sure she hadn't broken any traffic laws. She was driving well below the speed limit, and she had signaled at every turn. Still, she pulled over calmly to the side of the road, putting both hands on the steering wheel as she had been taught since she first learned to drive. Two officers stepped out of the patrol car. She noticed their body language immediately: confident, almost arrogant. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes. His name, embroidered on his badge, read Detective Marcus Fields. The other, slightly shorter with sandy blonde hair and a restless energy, was Officer Ryan Cole. They walked up to her window slowly, and Marcus tapped on the glass. Danielle lowered it just enough to speak. "Good evening, officers," she said politely, keeping her voice steady. "Is there a problem?" Danielle woke up the next morning feeling calm but focused. The memory of the previous night's roadside incident played in her mind like a movie on repeat. She had been polite, patient, and respectful, yet she had been treated unfairly. It wasn't about the ticket. That small piece of paper could be fought and see. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to the Brooksville Police Department. The internal audit was complete, and its findings had shaken the entire station. Some officers had small corrections to make, others were praised for excellent service, and a few had to face serious conversations about their conduct. Danielle handled everything with quiet professionalism. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lecture anyone, and never singled anyone out in front of others. Instead, she followed a simple principle: fairness before judgment. Early Monday morning, Marcus and Ryan received individual emails requesting private meetings with the chief. The subject line was short and clear: performance review mandatory. Ryan stared at the screen, his stomach churning. "This is it," he muttered under his breath. Marcus sat beside him, silently reading the email again and again. Unlike Ryan, he looked calm, but inside, his thoughts were racing. At exactly 10 a.m., Marcus entered Danielle's office first. She was seated behind her desk, reviewing a stack of documents, her posture straight and composed. Without looking up immediately, she gestured toward the chair in front of her. "Please, have a seat, Detective Fields." Marcus sat down, resting his hands on his knees. Danielle closed the file she was reading and looked at him directly. Her tone was calm, but her words carried weight. "Marcus," she began, "you've been with this department for 15 years. That's a long time. You know this city, its streets, and its people better than most. Your experience is valuable, and your leadership has influenced younger officers. But the audit has raised concerns." Marcus nodded slowly, his face neutral. "I understand." Danielle opened a folder and slid a report across the desk. "Multiple traffic stops under your name show missing video recordings and inconsistent paperwork. These aren't minor oversights, they're patterns. The community has raised questions, and we need to address them." For the first time, Marcus exhaled deeply. He knew there was no use denying it. "I made mistakes," he admitted softly. "I relied on old habits, shortcuts, things we were used to doing. But I never intended harm. Danielle studied his face, looking for honesty. She nodded slightly. Acknowledging the mistakes is the first step. But we can't move forward without accountability. You'll need to complete additional ethics training, and there will be a formal written warning on your record. After that, I expect complete compliance with new protocols. Marcus's shoulders relaxed slightly. It wasn't easy news, but it wasn't the end of his career. I understand, Chief, he said quietly. Things will be different from now on. Danielle gave a small, calm smile. Good. I believe people can change if they're willing to try. When Marcus left the office, he felt lighter, though still unsettled. The old way of doing things was gone, and he knew adapting wouldn't be easy. A few minutes later, Ryan entered. He sat nervously, his leg bouncing beneath the table. Danielle noticed but didn't comment. Officer Cole, she began, you've been here 8 years. You've built relationships with the team and the community. But the audit shows repeated irregularities in your reports, particularly during traffic stops. There are multiple instances where citations were issued without proper justification. Ryan hesitated before responding. I thought I was doing my job, he said, his voice low. I thought I was following Marcus's lead. But I see now that I didn't ask enough questions, and I didn't follow every rule the way I should have. Danielle leaned forward slightly, her tone steady but kind. I'm glad you recognize that. Officer Cole, this isn't about punishing you, it's about ensuring we all follow the same standards. You'll also be required to complete retraining and undergo 3 months of close supervision. Ryan nodded quickly, relief flooding his face. Yes, Chief. I'll do better. Danielle's expression softened slightly. I expect you to. When he left her office, he found Marcus waiting in the hallway. Neither of them spoke at first, but after a moment, Ryan said quietly, that could have been worse. Marcus nodded. Yeah, but it's a wake-up call. Things are changing. We have to change with them. Over the next few weeks, the entire precinct shifted under Danielle's leadership. She introduced weekly briefings where officers openly discussed challenges and community concerns. She arranged for officers to attend workshops on communication and cultural understanding. And most importantly, she created an open-door policy. Anyone in the community could bring forward concerns, knowing they would be heard. At first, some officers were skeptical. But gradually, they began to see the difference. Complaints from citizens decreased, cooperation from the public improved, and respect for the department started to rebuild. One afternoon, Danielle hosted a community forum at City Hall, inviting residents to share their thoughts directly with the department. The room was packed, and the energy was tense at first. But as Danielle spoke, her calm, steady voice reassured people. We're here to listen, she said sincerely. We're here to earn your trust, not demand it. People stood up one by one to share their experiences, some positive, some critical. Danielle took notes, responded respectfully, and promised follow-up on every concern raised. Marcus and Ryan attended, sitting in the back of the room quietly. For the first time, they saw the human side of their work, the real impact their actions had on people's lives. After the forum, Ryan admitted something to Marcus as they walked to their cars. You know, he said softly, I never realized how much people remember. Every traffic stop, every word we say, it sticks with them. Marcus nodded slowly. Neither did I. But now we know better. Danielle's reforms began showing results within a few months. Complaints about unfair treatment dropped significantly, and community surveys reported a noticeable increase in public trust. Officers started taking pride in their work again, knowing they were building something better together. For Marcus and Ryan, the transformation was personal. Their mandatory training sessions weren't easy, they were long, detailed, and sometimes uncomfortable. But they learned to approach situations differently, to treat every person with respect, and to follow procedure carefully. It wasn't just about protecting themselves anymore, it was about protecting the community. One Friday evening, several months later, Danielle walked through the precinct as she usually did, stopping by desks to check on her team. When she reached Marcus's desk, he looked up and gave a small, respectful nod. "Evening, Chief," he said. "Evening, Detective," Danielle replied warmly. "How's everything going?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Better than before. I can honestly say I'm learning to do things right this time." Danielle returned the smile. "That's what I like to hear." Across the room, Ryan was finishing up a report. He looked more focused than ever, carefully double-checking his notes before submitting them. Danielle noticed and gave him a quiet nod of approval. For the first time since her appointment, the precinct felt different, not tense or divided, but united. Danielle knew there was still work to be done. Change didn't happen overnight, and rebuilding trust was a process. But she also knew that progress had begun, and that was what mattered. Later that night, as Danielle drove home, she passed the exact spot where Marcus and Ryan had pulled her over months ago. She slowed down for a moment, looking at the quiet road illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights. That night had changed everything, not just for her, but for the entire department. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. It wasn't about winning or proving anyone wrong. It was about something bigger, creating a department where fairness came first, where everyone was treated with respect, and where the community felt safe again. Back at the precinct, Marcus and Ryan stayed late, reviewing files for an upcoming case. The two exchanged a glance, both silently acknowledging how far they had come. Ryan finally broke the silence with a small chuckle. "Who would have thought? The woman we pulled over turned out to be our boss." Marcus smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Yeah," he said softly. "And maybe that's the best thing that ever happened to us." For the first time in years, the precinct wasn't just a workplace. It was becoming what it was always meant to be, a team serving the people with honesty, integrity, and respect. And Danielle Harris, the woman they once underestimated, was leading them there one steady step at a time. Art. It was about principle. The next few weeks brought a wave of change to the Brooksville Police Department. Danielle Harris stepped into her role as Chief of Police with quiet determination, and from the very first day, her leadership style stood out. She wasn't loud or forceful, instead, she was calm, thoughtful, and precise. She observed everything, listened carefully, and spoke only when necessary. Her first order of business was clear: rebuild trust between the police and the community. To achieve that, Danielle introduced several new policies. Every officer would now wear body cameras during duty, and every traffic stop would require proper documentation. She also announced regular training sessions focused on ethics, communication, and fairness. But the biggest change came when Danielle ordered a complete review of past complaints against the department. She explained it in a meeting with all officers. "This isn't about punishment," she said in her steady voice. "It's about understanding where we've fallen short and fixing it. We can't move forward unless we first accept responsibility for the past." Her words were polite, but for Marcus and Ryan, they felt heavier than any order they had ever received. The review meant reopening years' worth of records, citations, traffic stops, and citizen complaints. Danielle formed a small internal audit team made up of trusted officers from outside Brooksville to ensure the process would remain unbiased. Inside the precinct, whispers grew louder. Some officers felt relieved, believing that Danielle's leadership would bring respect and fairness back to their work. Others, however, grew nervous, especially those with histories of questionable conduct. Marcus and Ryan were among the most unsettled. Every day, they walked into the station feeling like they were under a microscope. Even when no one said anything, they could sense the shift in atmosphere. Conversations paused when they entered rooms, and colleagues gave them subtle, Curious looks. One afternoon, Marcus and Ryan sat together in the locker room, speaking in low voices. "This isn't good," Ryan muttered, lacing up his boots. "The audit team has been digging through files all week. If they see that stop report from the SUV, they're going to ask questions." Marcus leaned against the locker, his expression calm but tense. "We followed procedure," he said flatly. "We can justify everything we did." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Can we?" "There was no probable cause, Marcus. And the body cam wasn't even on." Marcus clenched his jaw. "Then we say it was a technical issue." Ryan shook his head slowly, exhaling heavily. "She knows what happened that night. I could see it in her eyes." For the first time, Marcus didn't argue. Deep down, he felt the same. Meanwhile, Danielle kept her focus on the bigger picture. She spent hours reviewing reports in her office, analyzing complaint data, and meeting with community leaders to understand concerns. Her approach earned her quiet respect from several officers who had long wanted change but never had the power to push for it. One morning, Danielle called Linda Moore, the investigator from Internal Affairs, into her office. Linda carried a thick folder filled with findings from the audit. "We've started reviewing officer conduct over the past 3 years, Linda explained, opening the file. "Most officers have clean records. A few have minor complaints, nothing unusual. But," she hesitated, "there are some cases that stand out." Danielle leaned forward slightly. "Which ones?" Linda flipped through the pages, stopping at one section. "Detective Marcus Fields and Officer Ryan Cole. There are multiple traffic stops flagged for irregularities, unclear justifications, missing video recordings, inconsistent reports." Danielle didn't react outwardly, but she made a note on her pad. "Keep digging," she said calmly. "I want everything properly documented. No assumptions, just facts." Linda nodded and left the office, leaving Danielle alone with her thoughts. She glanced briefly at the small USB drive on her desk, the one containing her dashcam footage from that night. She hadn't handed it over yet. She wanted to give the process time, to see whether Marcus and Ryan would step forward on their own. The next day, Danielle held another meeting with the entire department. Standing at the front of the conference room, she spoke clearly, "Starting next week, we'll begin one-on-one performance reviews. Every officer will meet privately with me to discuss expectations, training needs, and areas of improvement. These reviews are an opportunity to talk openly. I want transparency from everyone." A quiet ripple of tension moved through the room. Officers exchanged glances, and Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus stared straight ahead, his expression carefully neutral. After the meeting, Marcus pulled Ryan aside in the hallway. "She's going to ask us about that night," Ryan whispered, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. Marcus nodded slightly. "Then we stick to the report. Routine stop, suspected vehicle, standard procedure. We don't say anything more." Ryan hesitated. "What if she shows us the footage?" Marcus paused, his jaw tightening. "Then we deal with it when it comes." Later that week, Danielle began her individual meetings. Most of them were straightforward. She talked to officers about their strengths, listened to concerns, and encouraged everyone to see her as an ally, not an enemy. Many left her office feeling reassured. But when Marcus and Ryan's turn came, the tension was different. They entered her office together, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. Danielle greeted them politely, gesturing for them to sit. "Detective Fields, Officer Cole," she began calmly, "thank you for coming in. I've been reviewing department procedures and records, and I'd like to talk about your experience here." Marcus leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact. "Of course, Chief. I've been with the department 15 years. I know the city well." Ryan forced a small smile. "Same here. We're always out there trying to keep the streets safe. Danielle nodded slowly. I appreciate your dedication. I also want to make sure our practices are fair and consistent. There's a traffic stop from a few weeks ago that caught my attention. Both men tensed, though neither moved. Danielle opened a file on her desk but didn't reveal its contents. According to the report, she continued, a driver was stopped under suspicion of matching a description from an alert. The search found nothing, but a citation was issued. Marcus kept his voice steady. Yes, that was us. Standard stop. Nothing unusual. Danielle watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. I see, she said softly. Thank you for clarifying. She closed the file and offered a polite smile. That will be all for now. I'll follow up once the audit is complete. Marcus and Ryan stood slowly, thanked her, and left the office. Neither spoke until they were down the hallway. She knows, Ryan whispered, his voice tight. Marcus nodded grimly. Yet. She's giving us a chance to come clean. That's what this is. For the next few days, the pressure grew heavier. Danielle's leadership style remained calm and respectful, but everyone could feel the shift happening inside the department. Officers who had nothing to hide welcomed the changes, those with questionable pasts grew more cautious with every passing day. Then, one morning, an email went out to the entire department, subject, Internal Audit Findings Phase 1 from, Chief Danielle Harris. Message, the first phase of the audit has been completed. Meetings will be scheduled to review findings individually. We are committed to fairness and transparency at every step. Marcus read the email twice, his stomach tightening. Ryan rubbed his forehead, pacing back and forth near his desk. This is it, Ryan muttered. She's building a case. Marcus sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. No, he said quietly. She's building a department where we can't hide anymore. For the first time in years, Marcus felt uncertain not just about his job, but about everything. Danielle wasn't like any leader they had worked under before. She wasn't loud, she wasn't confrontational, but she was thorough. And that made her far more difficult to predict. As the week ended, Danielle prepared to take the next step. The audit results were clear, and changes were coming. But she also knew this wasn't just about Marcus and Ryan, it was about transforming an entire system. The real reckoning had only just begun. Sitting at her kitchen table, sipping her coffee, Danielle replayed the dashcam FO. The council chamber erupted in applause as Danielle Harris walked confidently onto the stage. The lights were bright, and cameras flashed rapidly, capturing every moment. Danielle's calm smile and graceful presence drew everyone's attention. She shook hands with Mayor Keller, then stepped toward the podium, facing the crowd of reporters, community members, and city officials. For Danielle, this moment felt surreal. Weeks of preparation, countless meetings, and silent patience had led to this day. But she wasn't nervous, she was ready. Thank you, she began, her voice steady but warm. I'm honored to stand here today. Brooksville is my home. I grew up here, and I know the strengths and challenges this community faces. My mission as your new chief of police is simple: to rebuild trust, ensure fairness, and create a department that serves everyone equally. The crowd nodded and clapped as she spoke. Her words weren't just prepared statements, they came from the heart. She talked about improving training, increasing transparency, and strengthening the relationship between the police department and the community. Back at the precinct, the announcement was being broadcast live on the television in the break room. Marcus, Ryan, and a few other officers sat casually, not paying much attention at first. Ryan was scrolling through his phone, while Marcus leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee. But when the mayor said Danielle's name, Ryan froze mid-sentence. He slowly looked up at the TV screen. Wait, Ryan whispered, pointing. Is that her? Marcus frowned, confused, and turned his head toward the screen. At first, he didn't believe what he was seeing. But there she was, Danielle Harris, the same woman they had pulled over just weeks ago. Standing at the podium, wearing a confident smile, announced as the new chief of police. Marcus blinked hard, leaning forward, as though trying to convince himself he was mistaken. "No way," he muttered under his breath. That can't be her." But it was. Ryan's face turned pale as he set his phone down slowly. "It's her," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's the same woman from the SUV." The room fell silent. The other officers glanced at Marcus and Ryan, curious about their sudden reaction. One of their colleagues, Officer James, raised an eyebrow. "You two know her?" Ryan stammered, trying to sound casual. Yeah, we, had a traffic stop with her." "Routine check." James shrugged, uninterested, and turned back to the TV. But Marcus and Ryan exchanged a tense glance. Inside, both of them were processing what this meant. Danielle wasn't just any driver. She was now their boss. Suddenly, the memory of that night came rushing back, the way Marcus had ordered her out of the car, the unnecessary search, Ryan's smirk when handing her the citation. They hadn't been respectful, and now they realized she remembered everything. For the rest of the day, Marcus and Ryan couldn't focus. Every step they took in the precinct felt heavier, every sound sharper. Whispers about the new chief spread quickly, and officers gathered in small groups to discuss what this meant for the department. By late afternoon, Danielle arrived at the precinct for the first time as chief of police. Her black SUV pulled into the parking lot, and officers watched from the windows as she stepped out, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. She walked with quiet confidence, greeting people with a polite smile but firm eye contact. Inside, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Officers straightened their uniforms, lowered their voices, and acted more professional than usual. Danielle entered the main hallway, and conversations stopped as she passed. Marcus stood near his desk, pretending to review paperwork, while Ryan busied himself at the coffee machine. Neither wanted to be the first to face her. "Good afternoon, everyone," Danielle said warmly, her voice carrying across the room. "I'm looking forward to working with all of you." Some officers smiled back. Others nodded quietly. But when her eyes briefly met Marcus's, he felt his chest tighten. She didn't pause, didn't frown, didn't acknowledge anything unusual. She simply moved on, heading straight to her new office. Ryan whispered under his breath, "She remembers us." "I know she does." Marcus clenched his jaw. "Keep calm," he muttered back. "Act normal. We don't know what she's thinking." Inside her office, Danielle unpacked a small stack of folders, including one labeled Internal Audit. She had spent the past week reviewing data about officer conduct, community complaints, and department policies. Her goal wasn't revenge, it was reform. But she couldn't ignore patterns of misconduct, especially when complaints were backed by evidence. Among the many files on her desk, there was one that stood out, the report she had filed weeks earlier, with her dashcam footage attached. She placed it neatly on top of the stack. Outside the office, Marcus paced nervously near the hallway. He tried to act composed when other officers passed by, but his mind was racing. He thought about all the times he and Ryan had cut corners, written citations without proper justification, or searched vehicles without cause. If Danielle decided to investigate, their past actions might come back to haunt them. Ryan finally approached him, whispering urgently. "Marcus, what do we do? She's gonna come after us." Marcus shook his head firmly. "We don't know that. She's the chief now. Maybe she wants a fresh start. We just do our jobs. Keep our heads down." But deep down, Marcus wasn't convinced. Later that evening, Danielle held a brief meeting with all the officers in the conference room. The atmosphere was tense as everyone took their seats. Danielle stood at the front, calm and composed. I know change isn't easy, she began. I know this department has faced challenges, and I also know there are hard-working, dedicated officers in this room. My goal isn't to point fingers, it's to create a culture where integrity and community trust come first. She paused, letting her words sink in. There will be changes, she continued. We'll be introducing body cameras, updated training programs, and a full review of past complaints to make sure we're operating fairly and transparently. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus stared straight ahead, expressionless, though his heart pounded faster with each word. Danielle's voice remained even, never rising, never sharp. I believe we can make this department one of the best in the state. But that means everyone here needs to uphold the highest standards. No exceptions. When the meeting ended, officers left quietly, processing the weight of her words. Some were excited about the reforms, hopeful for positive change. Others, like Marcus and Ryan, felt a growing unease. As Danielle walked back to her office, she passed by Marcus and Ryan standing near the door. She stopped for a moment, looked at both of them with a calm but steady gaze, and said, I look forward to working with you. Her tone was polite, but her eyes carried depth, firm, knowing, unshaken. Neither Marcus nor Ryan responded immediately. Finally, Marcus managed a tight smile. Yes, Chief, he said softly. Danielle nodded once and walked away. The moment she disappeared around the corner, Ryan let out a shaky breath. She knows, he whispered. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both understood perfectly. From that day forward, nothing at the precinct would ever be the same. Outage on her laptop. The video captured everything clearly, the flashing lights, the tone of the officers' voices, the baseless accusations, the unnecessary search, and finally, the citation. She shook her head slowly. This can't go on, she whispered to herself. Danielle had always believed in standing up for what was right, but she also understood that timing mattered. She couldn't act impulsively, especially considering her new position, the one she hadn't yet revealed to anyone in Brooksville. She was days away from publicly stepping into a powerful role that could change the dynamics of the entire police department. Still, she couldn't ignore what had happened. She needed to follow the process, not just for herself but for others who might have faced similar situations. That afternoon, Danielle dressed professionally and headed downtown to file an official complaint at the Internal Affairs Division. The office was quiet, with neutral-colored walls and a polite receptionist who handed her a form. She filled it out carefully, attaching a copy of her dashcam footage as evidence. The investigator, a middle-aged woman named Linda Moore, reviewed the file carefully. This is detailed, Linda said softly, watching the video. Thank you for bringing this in, Miss Harris. I promise we'll look into it thoroughly. Danielle smiled politely. I appreciate that. I know your job isn't easy, but transparency matters. Linda nodded knowingly, as though she had seen cases like this before. You'd be surprised how many complaints we get, but, this one, she paused, this one has weight. The footage helps. Leaving the office, Danielle felt a small sense of relief. She had taken the first step. But she also knew how slow these processes could be. Complaints like hers often sat at the bottom of a long list, buried in paperwork, while little ever changed. Across town, however, things were different at the police precinct. Detective Marcus Fields and Officer Ryan Cole sat in the break room, drinking coffee and laughing with two other officers. Ryan leaned back in his chair, smirking. She actually filed a complaint, Ryan said, shaking his head. Can you believe that? Marcus scoffed. People file complaints all the time. Nothing ever happens. You'll see. But despite his confident tone, there was a flicker of unease in Marcus's eyes. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know that sometimes complaints could spiral into full-blown investigations, especially when there was solid evidence involved. For the next few weeks, subtle changes began to ripple through the department. Whispers spread quietly between desks and hallways. There were rumors of an upcoming audit, a review of officers' conduct, past complaints, and recorded interactions with citizens. Ryan brushed it off. Audits happen all the time, he told Marcus during a late-night patrol. They're just trying to look busy. But Marcus wasn't so sure. Something about the timing felt different. Danielle, meanwhile, kept a low profile. She went about her days as usual, going to work, attending meetings, and preparing for the big announcement at City Hall next week. Very few people knew that she had been chosen as the new chief of police, a decision made quietly by the city council after months of evaluating candidates from across the state. It was a huge responsibility. Danielle had spent years building a strong reputation for fairness, integrity, and community-driven leadership. She had been hired to restore trust in a department struggling with public confidence. But she knew the job wouldn't be easy, especially when some of the current officers had grown comfortable operating without accountability. One evening, Danielle attended a private briefing with the city council. The room was quiet and serious as the mayor, David Keller, went over the details of her upcoming introduction. "We're expecting some resistance," Mayor Keller admitted. "Change always comes with pushback. But your track record speaks for itself, Danielle. You're the right person for this job." Danielle nodded, her voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to target anyone. I'm here to bring fairness back, to rebuild trust between the community and law enforcement." "That's exactly why we chose you," the mayor said with a reassuring smile. "But," he leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly, "be prepared. Some officers aren't going to like it. Especially the ones who've gotten used to doing things their way." Danielle understood. She knew she couldn't expect everyone to welcome her leadership immediately. Change often made people uncomfortable, especially when it exposed practices that had gone unchecked for too long. Over the next few days, rumors began to circulate within the precinct. Officers whispered about a new boss coming in from outside Brooksville. Some welcomed the idea, hoping it would bring fresh energy and better training. Others, like Marcus and Ryan, viewed it as a threat. During one shift change, Ryan leaned over to Marcus in the locker room. "You hear about the new chief?" Marcus shrugged, tying his boots. "Yeah. Some outsider, right? Probably just another politician's pick. We'll keep doing our jobs. Doesn't matter who's in charge." Ryan grinned faintly. "Hope you're right. But, what if they start digging into old cases?" Marcus paused for a moment, his hands still. "Then we make sure we look clean," he said slowly. Meanwhile, Danielle quietly monitored the situation, keeping close contact with the mayor and the city council. The more she learned about the department's internal structure, the clearer it became that reforms were necessary. There were good officers working hard to protect the community, but there were also patterns of misconduct that couldn't be ignored. The tension continued to build in the days leading up to the announcement. Finally, the morning of the city council event arrived. Danielle stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her neatly pressed suit. Her reflection showed calm determination. She wasn't just walking into a job, she was stepping into a challenge that would define her career. Before leaving, she checked her bag one last time, making sure she had copies of key reports, her prepared speech, and, tucked neatly into a folder, the dashcam footage from that night. When she arrived at City Hall, reporters gathered outside, cameras flashing, microphones ready. The air buzzed with anticipation as citizens filled the seats inside the council chamber. Danielle took a deep breath and reminded herself why she had accepted this role, not for power, not for recognition, but because she believed in fairness, accountability, and respect. Back at the precinct, Marcus and Ryan were on duty when they got the notification about the live broadcast. Ryan pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "Guess they're announcing the new chief," he said casually, sipping his coffee. "Bet it's some big city guy coming to fix us." Marcus glanced over his shoulder at the television in the break room, where the local news was airing the event. "Doesn't matter who it is," he muttered. "We've been here for years. We know how things work." Neither of them had any idea what was about to happen. Inside City Hall, the mayor stepped up to the podium, his voice ringing clearly through the chamber. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today marks the start of a new chapter for the Brooksville Police Department. After a long and careful selection process, we are proud to introduce a leader who embodies integrity, dedication, and community trust." The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. "Please welcome," the mayor said with a smile, "our new chief of police, Danielle Harris." Marcus leaned slightly, his tone casual but with a hint of authority. "License and registration, please." Danielle handed them over without hesitation. "Can I ask what this is about?" Ryan, standing behind Marcus, gave a small smirk. "Routine stop," he said. "We've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area. Yours matches the description." Danielle raised an eyebrow slightly but didn't argue. "I see. Well, I can assure you I'm just heading home from work." Marcus examined her documents, then glanced at Ryan before speaking again. "Do you mind stepping out of the vehicle, ma'am? Just a quick check." Danielle hesitated. She knew her rights, but she also knew arguing on the roadside rarely led anywhere productive. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out. The cool breeze brushed against her face, but inside, she felt tense. Marcus circled the car, shining his flashlight unnecessarily into every window, while Ryan began asking her a series of questions. "Where are you coming from?" "My office," she replied calmly. "Where do you work?" "In the city." "Doing what?" Danielle noticed the tone in Ryan's voice. It wasn't curiosity, it was suspicion. She answered carefully, keeping her responses short but polite. After a few minutes, Marcus returned. "We're going to need to check your vehicle," he said. "Is there a specific reason for that?" Danielle asked, her voice still composed but firm. "Like my partner said," Marcus replied, "there have been reports of illegal substances moving through this area. We need to make sure everything's clear." Danielle knew they didn't have probable cause. She also knew that arguing would only prolong the situation. "I understand," she said softly. "I just want to be on my way soon." Ryan opened her trunk and began moving things around her neatly packed laptop bag, a box of files, and a grocery bag she'd picked up on her way home. Nothing was out of place, and Danielle knew they wouldn't find anything. But she noticed something else. The two officers kept exchanging small, knowing glances and quiet chuckles. It was subtle, but she picked up on it immediately. They weren't treating this as a serious investigation. To them, this was routine, just another driver they could intimidate without consequence. After several long minutes, Marcus closed the trunk. "All right, nothing here," he said, almost sounding disappointed. Then he handed her a yellow slip of paper. "What's this?" Danielle asked, scanning the form. "Citation for improper lane change," Marcus said casually, though his eyes didn't quite meet hers. Danielle was stunned. "I didn't change lanes at all." Ryan shrugged, smirking faintly. "You must have missed it. Don't worry, you can contest it in court if you want." She looked at both officers, keeping her expression neutral. Inside, though, frustration burned quietly. She knew exactly what had happened here. They pulled her over without reason, searched her car without cause, and now handed her a baseless ticket just to assert authority. "Thank you, officers," Danielle said softly, taking the citation without protest. Marcus gave a short nod, as though dismissing her, and they walked back to their patrol car. Danielle got into her SUV, started the engine, and drove off slowly, keeping her face calm and composed. But inside, her thoughts were racing. She had grown up in Brooksville. She remembered stories from her neighbors and friends how some officers treated people differently depending on who they were. She had always hoped things had changed over the years. That night, she realized how wrong she was. As she drove away, she reached into her glove compartment and pulled out a small dash camera. She had installed it months ago, more out of habit than necessity, but tonight, it had recorded everything: the stop, the search, the baseless ticket, even Ryan's smirk when he handed it over. Danielle exhaled deeply, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She was determined. She knew this wasn't just about her. If these officers had done this to her, they had probably done it to countless others. She wasn't someone who sought confrontation, but she wasn't going to stay silent either. That night, as she reached home and parked in her driveway, she sat in her car for a moment, staring at the glowing streetlights outside. Her phone buzzed with a message from a colleague reminding her of the upcoming announcement at City Hall next week, a secret she had kept carefully guarded until now. Danielle smiled faintly to herself. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The officers thought this was just another routine stop. They had no idea who she really was or the position she was about to step into. And soon, everything was going to change.